I might start off by saying I came to Chester in 1969, and although not a native, there's a real distinction, have to be born here. But I came here because it was really a quaint town, really reminded me of where I grew up. But it was a small town, and since then, I'm sure you know, everybody realizes certainly that comes to a program like this, how it's become a real sort of art center, art-focused town, and it's really a pleasant change, and it's still a nice town I grew up in. For the people who are largely responsible for that, and there are others, of course, but four are up here today, and I'm going to talk about their coming to Chester and what brought them, and I guess what kept them, and that. Unfortunately, Richard Zeman couldn't be with us tonight, but Sosse Baker is going to say something about it, about Richard, and brought a little bit of his work so that if you're not familiar with it, you could see that. We have Sosse Baker, Basket Maker Supreme, and some of her works are up here. Leif Nilsson, most of you realize his work and have seen it, I'm sure. Dina Varano, and some examples of her jewel work and that, if you haven't already seen it, is up here. And Jan Good, who with her husband, Peter Good, developed a graphic design, world famous, I guess, area. But Jan is, as most of you, I'm sure, all of you realize, is a real entrepreneur and innovative artist herself in her own right. So I'll let them tell you about what brought them to work in that. I'll ask one thing. I'm going to say that it's okay for these people to question each other while they talk, while each of them talks, but maybe you can hold the questions, and we'd love to have questions at the end. Maybe you could hold until after the people have spoken so that everybody gets a shot at talking and gets to be heard. All right, so with no further ado, I'll let Sosse Baker start it off.
Okay. Richard, I just wanted everyone to know, I talked to Richard this morning. He called, and he's fine. He's not sick. He's in good health, but he was concerned about sitting too long, and he was a little concerned about it. So I brought some pieces that you might want to see. Maybe most of you have seen his work, but this was a engraving he did for a Chester artist show, and Richard always delivered late. So he arrived, and the opening was at 5. He came with his piece of art at 15:45. And I said, oh my God, Richard, we're going to have to put you in the hall on the closet door. I'm so sorry. He said, I don't care. I'll be back, he said, with Joan. So he left. As I'm hanging it, it's #1, and it's one that many of you probably saw Richard working on, sitting on Water Street for weeks. He would sit out there. And it's, I think, one of his most beautiful ones. And when I hung it, I asked Jack to take a look. I said, I think we need to buy it. So we put a dot on it. By the end of the night, there were 11 dots. So needless to say, the edition is sold out. But it's worth taking a look at if you haven't seen it. And what he's doing now are breathtaking pencil sketches. And I brought one. I, bought that early on. It was for the postcard show. So you might want to take a look at these two pieces. We came to Chester in 1982. And we saw, enjoyed a beautiful town, even though there were buildings that needed a lot of work. But there were little hints of, for instance, flowers in the windows, boxes. There were trees. It just felt like a really nice place. One of a kind antiques was a shop that was there, and that building looked pretty good. And further down, we had the #1 best French restaurant in the state. And so here's this town that nobody knows about, and yet you could just feel that it was going to look spectacular someday. And inch by inch, it's been so nice watching it. But we found people to be so friendly, especially older people who had lived here all their lives. They're very welcome to newcomers. So it was a great spot for me, us. I've been making baskets for about 45 years. So buying the gallery, or opening the gallery, gave me a place to exhibit my work. And because I teach, or taught at Wesleyan Potters, Guilford Handcraft Center, Chester brought me closer to those places. So it was a good move, and I have no regrets. I love living here.
Where did you move from?
Hebron.
Hebron.
17 years in Hebron. I never thought, I thought we'd spend our rest of our lives in that little house by a brook with 3,000 acres of state forest. And Jack worked for a while as an international consultant, and we had a chance to live in England. And after traveling England and Scotland, I said, you know, when I'm old, I want to live in a village. And there it is. I'm old and I live in a village. The baskets are both prize winners in the basketry world really exploded throughout the country, and there were conferences in Michigan and Denver, and I traveled a lot to teach at those, and then I would enter a basket, and both of them have blue ribbons and a nice cash gift. So, and I'm still making baskets, and you can find them at the Black Cat Leather. And you can find Richard Zeman's work at Chester Gallery. So, that's it.
Want to go next? So, I moved to Chester in 1982, same year, from Ohio.
Yeah, I knew it was about the same.
Yeah, December of '82. Am I close enough to the mic?
Yeah.
My father, we lived in Old Lyme, and I was going to the Lyme Academy, and I was renting for my father in Old Lyme, and then taking off to go travel Europe and stuff, and come back, and then, go back to school, and then he bought a house in Chester. So I said, okay, I'll live with him in Chester. So I came up here, it was 1982, I was 20 years old. So I came to Chester, and I thought, this is a really cool town. I hadn't really spent any time here. And after traveling, hitchhiking across the country, hitchhiking in trains and stuff in Europe, I came here and I was like, this is a really, really, really interesting town. There's not many towns like this in the States or in the world, but it reminds me of a European village with vernacular architecture, and it's just perfectly laid out, and every step you take there's a different viewpoint. And so I started painting in the center of town back in '83, I guess it's spring of '83, and eventually rented an apartment above 1 Main Street, which was 3 Main Street, which is where the little shop is. And yeah, you house sat for us for the summer when we were, Catherine, my wife at the time, and I were in traveling someplace. I think we were in France at the time for a few months, and painting. And so then 1990, that was 1989. I'm not going to get I just want to lay the foundation here pretty quickly. So in 1989, we moved into the apartment. In 1990, my studio, the little building next to the house at number 3 Spring Street, was for rent. And I said, oh my God, how much do they want? How much do they want? They didn't want one very much. It was like under $200 a month. So the door was just that barn door. It's where Richard Sachs had his shop for a long time. And Mary Way had a flower shop there for a while, and somebody else had an antique shop. But they always had that big barn door, so they had to keep that open when they were open, with all the heat going out. So when I got it, I put the French doors in there, which are actually Italian balcony windows. And so I could keep heat in there. And so I had my shop, and I would be open on weekends, and I would stand outside painting when I was open on weekends. And then I started being open more often because I was getting into the paintings I did out in front. And then the house, actually the family, the Seymours, lost it to the bank. The bank tried to sell it, and finally went up for auction, and Cadlick, so One of a Kind Antiques, and Tom Cadlick was a lawyer in town, and he worked for the Spriglio's, did a lot of work for who have the Erin Manor. And he said, what do you think? Do you think you can buy this building at auction and rent it out to Leif? He said, yeah, I think we should do that. So we went one snowy night, and he got the place for not very much. It needed a lot of work, and so we rented it for a couple of years, and then bought it in 1995, started to buy it, and now it's mine, and done a lot of work to it. And let's see, where's it? This is a view, the latest oil painting that I did this winter. I started in January sometime, and then by the end of February, the light had changed so much that it was turning into a springtime painting. Every time we got a dusting of snow, I'd work on it again for a couple of days and a few days, and then do some other projects and then come back to it. And finally one day I just didn't work on it anymore, so I guess it's done. So they either, I get fed up with them, or they get fed up with me, but they finish themselves sometimes. They all do, I guess, actually. But I started it, and it was very atmospheric and kind of like blowing dust all around. And then people say, oh, I love it. I said, well, thank you, but I've still got some more to do on it. And every time I showed it to somebody, they said, it's done? I said, no, well, I don't know. And then once the shadows did this trick over here, and I got that, I nailed it, I think. I said, I think that's it. I can't do any more, I'm just gonna mess it up if I keep pushing it. Because the way, the sun keeps coming up, more and more towards the northern sky in the springtime, until you finally have, the summer solstice, and then it goes back the other way. So this is starting at the beginning of that coming back of spring. So I call it winter garden, and so the garden, I was going to bring a garden painting, summer garden painting, but I decided to bring what I do in the summers, go out in my sailboat and paint on the river. And this is down in North Cove and Old Saybrook, and that's my Ganesh, my sailboat, my catboat, and Dink, my dinghy. So I don't know if you're familiar with who Ganesh is, the Indian god or goddess, I'm not quite sure what sex it is. It's an elephant, and it rides around on a rat named Dink. So that's how that guy's name. I guess that's all I have to say. So I paint with a palette knife, or painting knife is actually called, and I use a French, half box or quarter box, half box or full box easel, so it's easy to carry around. And I like doing kind of large paintings. I call this a medium-sized large painting, 30 by 40, but I haven't done anything much bigger than that recently because they're, the big ones are just a lot bigger, take a lot longer, and I've got a lot of them, so I'm going back to my medium-sized things for a little while. I also like to do small paintings, like 6 by 9 inches, 9 by 12. 16 by 20, kind of getting back into that size. And I started doing some stuff on my phone and on my iPad lately, which is pretty cool, using just like whatever markup tools there are, and with my finger, like a crayon, or like a pastel, or like a marker, and that's been kind of fun. So that's what I've actually done. I haven't done an oil painting since the snow scene. I think that's the last one I've done. The first one I did this year, and I've just been doing these energy sketches, like at a bar, watching musicians play and getting the action of the bands and the people sitting around. You actually drink less when you're drawing at a bar. It's a cheaper way to go and see music. You get hammered, you can just draw. And the Little House actually just had Friday night. They had these two guys called Ian and Michael, and they do English sea shanty kind of songs. They're American sea shanty songs. And they were setting up to play, and I had it in my calendar to go see them, but I forgot to look at my calendar. I just happened to go in there to buy some beer. I was like, oh, they're playing tonight. So I went home and got my iPad, and I sat down and I did 4 little drawings, maybe 5. One of them, I was almost not done, but I'm getting along with it. I'm moving really fast with my finger, drawing my middle finger for some reason. And all of a sudden, boom, the whole thing disappeared. That's happened before. That happened in Ireland last year when we were in a pub someplace and I was drawing with musicians. And that's how I started. We went to Ireland. Laura and I went to Ireland last spring, and about this time of year, March. And I was bringing my watercolors and gouache, and I realized that the 10-day forecast was 50 mile-an-hour gusts and rain, all the time. 100% chance of rain, that's normal for Ireland. But I thought, oh man, I don't think I'm gonna be able to paint in a rental car, flipping the brush and stuff like that. It's just, maybe I can figure out how to draw on my iPad. So I figured it out. I never knew how to do it, but I knew that you could take a note and mark it up. You could write on it 18 feet or whatever, do a little sketch and point an arrow at something. I thought, well, good. So I started doing these drawings, and I brought that, and I did a bunch of things in Ireland from life, sitting in front of a view, looking at it and painting it as if it was a pastel. And then I printed them out, and because they're just energy until they get printed. And so I called them energy drawings, and I've sold a few of them. And went to the Side Door Jazz Club in Online, with the Online in last week, I guess it was. And I got a triple date with some other friends. And when one of the lady's boyfriend, his birthday was coming up, and so she, on the side, commissioned me, so I had to do one. So it's actually working. It's so clean, One of the reasons I started using my knife is because I was working on a project rebuilding the front porch at the house, and this is like 20 years ago, 24 years ago, maybe 23 years ago. And because the porch was falling apart, the only thing holding it up was the carpenter ants, and they were getting tired. So it was in June, so I'd be out working, painting in the morning, and then come back around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and work on it with Rick Price, and then by 4:30 I'd go back out and paint again, and I had like 8 wet brushes I have to wash out at night, and it's just what a waste. So I thought, why don't I just use my knife? One wipe and it's clean. So the next day I worked on that painting and with the knife, and I haven't turned back. So it's a nice size knife. It was actually George Rapp's knife, which is what's his name? Jonathan Rapp from the Rivertown. His grandfather, I used to do handyman jobs for him back when I was in art school. And he gave me a bunch of art supplies. That was one of them. I still have this knife. It's beautiful. So one wipe is clean. You can use the same paper towel all week. It's just amazing. You use all the paint that's on the palette. It's great. I recommend it. So that will, watching you laugh made me laugh, because using a knife is kind of like using banjo picks. They get sharp. The more you play with the banjo pick, the sharper it becomes. It's like a little claw, and because it's made out of nickel-plated steel, I guess, or it's all nickel, but it gets honed by rubbing it against the strings all the time. So the knife gets honed too when you're rubbing it on the palette, wiping the palette blade like you're wetting it, and then painting. And sometimes they get worn out. Sometimes you have to take them and run them on just like a chisel or a plain blade to rub it on a piece of straighten it out on a piece of sandpaper, like maybe down on a flat stone. So I've had to do that a few times, and this knife is getting pretty thin now, so it's, if anybody knows, if anybody has one of these old knives that's all beautifully made, let me know, I might buy it from you. What was I gonna say? Chester. Yeah, so all of this shows you that I've been in Chester for a while, and I love living in downtown, and like the village, you know, the whole idea of living in a village is great. I almost bought some land and built a house out in the woods. I'm glad I didn't do that, because I really like being, I have enough land behind me that, you know, I have like a half an acre, and I have this little, you know, like an oasis in the middle of town. So I got involved in the merchants group with Tom Perry and Sosse and Jan and everybody, Dina and everybody. And suddenly I was the head of the merchants. And I thought, well, so I thought, well, I'm going to just continue promoting these art openings that we have, and again, try to promote the town as an arts town, because it really is. And I noticed that right away. And then people started coming to town and saying, you know, I said, well, how did you hear about Chester? I said, well, we always heard it was an arts town. And I thought, well, it's working, so it worked. And then all we have to do now is just, you know, make sure that it continues to be one. And I think we're doing a good job of that, I hope. And thank you all for coming to listen to these go on and on about
Hi, I'm Dina, and I'm not a native. I moved here in the middle of high school, so maybe I'm sort of a native, from Essex, to Essex. And I guess I got my start in jewelry by just playing around in my dad's garage, hammering metal. One day I made a pair of earrings and I wore them to school. I went to Valley, and my art teacher at the time, who was a mentor to many of us on the shoreline, Margaret Kangley, thank you, Margaret, she inspired all of us. And she said, oh, I like earrings, you should make them in sterling silver. And I was like, oh my God, what's that? So I remember asking my mom to drive me to the coin shop in Madison and buy some silver. So that's how I started making and selling jewelry in high school. And then I went to Rhode Island School of Design and got a BFA in jewelry and metalsmithing. Did my junior year in Rome, which was really inspiring. Lived there, and then after I graduated, I went back to Rome and did a graduate program for the summer. And I came home in the fall, because my sister was getting married, and I thought, oh, I have to rent a studio because I love to work, and I rented one in Essex. And then I would hear about the Chester Gallery having openings, and so I would come to town, and I just knew it was a place I wanted to be, because there were so many artists, there's such an artistic vibe. That's when I met Leif, his openings, and I just wanted to be a part of the community. And Jan and Peter, you guys were here, and I met all of you. And then, so yeah, I decided to open a store, and I wanted to do kind of an artisan gallery, because after living in Italy, I loved the workshop and gallery idea. So the first decade I was in business, I did that. I had my workshop there, which was great. I wasn't able to get a lot done, but it was really nice to share my process with everybody. And I do miss that. I might bring it back. There's ideas about that. But anyway, and then I started to carry other artists' work, because I would travel and do shows and meet lots of artists, and I wanted to share my work as well as other artists' work in my store. So my store is like a aesthetic, curated collection of artisan things that are made by hand, which I feel is a very powerful thing. People really connect to that, and when you hold something that someone sculpted or crafted, you can feel the integrity of that. And I feel really lucky to make something that I love in my studio, and then I bring it to my store, and someone comes in and they love it, and then they give it to someone they love, so I'm part of this really nice cycle of, beauty or inspiration. And then having a store, I felt was a great place to connect, right? Lots of us want to do in life is connect with people, and having a place to gather and inspire people, and having all the openings in town. I think we all work hard to create events, and it's a time for us to serve you all wine and come to town and see what we're working on, and I feel really happy to be a part of that. And what else? I'm really happy to be part of the community in Chester, and I think we've all created relationships with each other, but also customers that have become great friends, and for us who have stores, they bring their kids and the next generation, and it's just really fun to be a part of that. So I'm happy to contribute to the vitality of Chester. Yay, Chester!
Because several of you probably have already heard me talk about how much I love Chester. It was 2019 when Peter and I gave a talk about the work we do for Chester. And a lot of what I talked about was how Chester provides. And that's been a continuing theme. And people will say, well, that's the universe providing. But most of the time, it's right here in Chester that something has provided for me. And my very first experience, lately I've been calling it serendipity, but it's kind of the same thing as Chester providing. Well, Peter and I discovered Chester way, way, way long before we even moved here. His sister was living here on Cedar Lake, a lovely little cottage on the lake. She had moved away, but Peter, we had been in New York. We had a fabulous rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn Heights, right next to the river. And I wanted to start a family. We'd been married a few years, and Peter got a job in Middletown. And at that point, this is 1969, Route 9 was coming through, because before that, when we would visit Peter's sister, we had to go. So I went with Peter's sister and met Roy Monty to find a place to live. And Dina and Roy said, I think there's a little place that just came available. Go take a look at it. I'll check with the landlord. Well, damn it. It was a perfect little tiny house on Liberty Street with an amazingly interesting man who lived right next door who owned both houses. And it was $130 a month, which is what we were paying for a rent-controlled apartment in New York. So we grabbed it. He said, I have to talk to the landlord. Sure. Okay, so we moved in. And that was in the winter. In the spring, cleaning up the yard. And what do I find? A little business card for a doctor, a gynecologist. And I thought, okay, that's the first signal. I want to have children. And, I ended up not using him. But again, serendipity, because I was excited about having a Lamaze birth. And the only reason I knew about that is because Peter in New York had done book jacket for the very first book about Lamaze to hit the States. And I ended up, after going to the first guy in Madison and a guy at Yale, I connected with a fabulous guy in Harvard Hospital, which was great, because Peter's from Hartford. And found Lamaze lessons in Centerbrook, and damn it, Justin in 1970 was the first Lamaze child to be born at Harvard Hospital. Again, timing. This was serendipity, whatever. So that's my intro, but I did write a little thing about what intro about what Chester means also. And Sandy's invitation to speak today had me pondering what to think and say. First thought that entered my mind was that the other old-timers, the two other old-timers ought to be here. Peter Good and Sosse Baker. Though not here now, surely both are with us in spirit. And this morning, my memory focused on some of my most prized possessions. Several demon prints, lots of Dina ornaments, adornments, and I don't wear jewelry anymore, so I need to give it to my grandkids and
Right, you're
kids.
passing it down.
I'm passing it down, yeah. Okay, and then saucy baskets, and one perfect Leif. An early one, it's tiny.
Yeah, a little river scene.
Love it.
A river scene?
River.
Yep.
Yeah. And these thoughts remind me of an event many years ago when Saul's generosity and support of my artistic journey was surprising and uplifting for me. This was many, many years ago. I was already working, doing my cap drawings and all kinds of more conventional work, but people loved it, gear, and I always wanted to do Well, I had just started, this was in the mid-'80s, I thought, I want to do something different. I started doing my body prints. There's a whole story about it, but they're very abstract, and yet they are life-size, because they're me. But they're abstract, and I spent years evolving that. But at the same time, I was running for planning and zoning. And the opening of the exhibit, I was trying to exactly the date, the opening of the exhibit coincided with the Democratic cocktail party fundraiser. It was also going to be at the gallery. And I'm thinking, oh man, what are the Chester folks gonna think? We're gonna vote for this woman to make smart decisions about zoning, and look what she's doing. And I got all nervous about it. Well, damn it. I went down about 5 o'clock as the exhibit is supposed to, start. And Sosse comes up to me and she says, Jan, Saul is here. And that was his way. He would come early on and see the work.
Yeah, he paid the dues, but he never came to the party.
Well, he had come, he purchased the body print. There's a little red soul sign. And damn it, I said, okay. This is like the big guy in the neighborhood saying, don't mess with her. She knows what she's doing. It's okay. And I spent another 20 years on planning and zoning, so whether it helped or not, I don't know. Now the other thing I do need to mention, I try not to be emotional about it, is again serendipity. 2 years ago, sorry, on April 16th, Peter and I drove to the clinic. He said, something's wrong, Gina. And he was absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. We were going to play pool. The car was all loaded with tapenade that Peter had made for this pool game. And he came downstairs and he said, something's wrong. We go down to the clinic, and after testing, they say, there's a mass on Peter's brain. And 16 days later, on May 2nd, he's gone. He's gone. And I think because I'm such a number person, I'm very intuitive but analytical. There's something about numbers for me and timing that I just thought, wow, to be here tonight at this kind of pivotal time in my life. But what I want to say about that is this community. So incredibly supportive of us through the entire time. And when we didn't know how it was going to play out, we said, please don't even ask questions. I'll tell you when I need you to come. But people were so respectful and supportive, and it was just the most, and the experience was absolutely terrific because Peter had done enough. You know, we talked about that when we had the talk about, and he was tired, you know, we both had such incredible opportunities to use our talents and our skills in this little town and to be so comfortable and welcome by everyone. And as Dina and Sosse and Leif said, none of us as artists, we couldn't shut ourselves away in the studio and just work all the time, you know. So we were all doing things to help support our art, you know. And that was part of the community too, that it was so supportive of what we were able to do here. So anyway, it's serendipity for me that I can come today and thank this community and how supportive we've all been. And what I have been doing, I've always done my art to the point where I always said, I don't even care if anybody cares or sees it, I just need to do this. And then to see that it's been so appreciated and welcomed. But what I've been doing, actually, since Peter died, but even before that, I have been designing and writing books. And after Peter died, I wrote a memoir, and then that evolved into a whole series of books. And the first, Peter and I did a fun book about cats. And I have to say too, that was inspired. Peter had always designed books for clients. We had never really done our own. And after Malpa died, I asked Carrie, I want to do something. And she said, well, this is COVID. This, we had done memorials for people. He said, we're just doing a Zoom. And I said, okay. And same fall that Peter and I had talked about our work for Chester, Al had given a talk about ephemera. And I said, that's what I want to do. Now, I'd never published our own books, self-published our own books, but I said, damn it, I'm going to do this. And I had the most wonderful time. It took like 4 months because in his talk, a lot of the ephemera was not specifically about Chester. So I had to research with the archivist, Carrie, and find other work that was about Chester. And it's a wonderful book. I think it ought to be even more well known. There are still quite a few copies. And I have one here for people to see if anyone's interested. But I also have to say that realize whenever you do anything for someone else, you get more back. You get more back. And by taking the time to really learn again, but to my skills about book design and all that, but I was then encouraged to do our own books. So Peter and I did a book about cats, and that was a lot of fun. And now what I've been able to do is a whole series of books about Peter's and my work together, our lives together, and how many people my age and older or younger, they want to leave a legacy. They want to, write an autobiography or whatever. And for me as a designer, it can't be a long book. It's going to be word and images, which is what graphic design is all about, word and image. So I have quite a few here for people to see. They're on the website. If anyone's interested, don't buy on the website, come talk to me. You won't have to pay shipping, whatever, if you're interested. And so that's what I've been doing now, and what I chose, I'm still doing, I can't actually do my personal art anymore, because 10 years ago, I was struck down with Guillain-Barré, and my hands and feet are still numb. So I can't draw and paint the way I used to. But again, the timing for me, serendipity, I can hold a damn mouse, and I can design, and I can take wonderful photographs and enhance them, and I am, in some ways, I feel more excited and energized about my own creativity than I ever have in my whole life, because I have time to myself. I love my Joanne, but I've never ever lived by myself. So I got married when I was beginning of my senior year. So it's a whole other experience, and that's okay too. It's good to think about that, And, but anyway, so that is what I have brought, is as much as Peter and I were very different in our personal art, I feel that the work we did, that we collaborated on, is some of the most lasting and meaningful and popular and loved. Our whole calendar series, and other things that we did together, and now these books. And I'm still doing fun story too, because if any of you came to we did give a wonderful talk about the ephemera book, and everyone that was involved, Carrie editing, and our archivist, and anyway, and I did say at one point, most of you think that Peter and I have such a perfect, easygoing relationship. Not true. Because Peter had designed the cover of this book. And no, this is crazy. I have to find 6 different fonts, typefaces? No, doesn't make any sense. Well, when I finally realized what he was asking for, it all came together, and it's probably the most powerful book cover we've ever done. And the funny thing is, all of the subsequent books that I've been working on are using that idea of open letter forms with imagery, which I have railed against. And I think about him all the time. Damn it, you were right. And I'm having so much fun with that. So there's lots of lessons here that I've had the time to think about now. But I'm basically have time to myself. And anyway, and I'm just grateful to be able to share all that with you folks.
actually, we had a lot of coincidences. Friends of mine worked for Michael. I don't know, I lived in a place where he lived. He lived over before I had. But it all happened at Chester Gallery. There was an opening. You know, we were talking.
Wait a minute.
I know everyone claims.
No, the story I remember was seeing him on a ladder
Oh, right.
in
Well,
our building.
okay. Yes.
He's painting our
Okay.
building
Yes.
on a ladder.
Okay, so when I was house sitting for Leif, across the street from, yes, see, I am very connected. Across the street from Janet Peters' building, my friends are working for this guy named Michael, and he's on a scaffold, and he's up there, and everyone is, working, and I was talking to the crew or something, and I think you said, "Hey, no flirting with the help." Right? And I wanted to say, "Hey, what about the boss?" But I didn't. But then, yeah, Jeremy, I think I was with him. I don't know. There were a couple times we ran into each other, but the Chester Gallery was an opening, and I feel like it may have been you and Jesse's opening.
It could have been, because I remember going to our house afterwards.
Yeah, everybody was swimming over there, and it was a long, great, good night, which is, if anyone knows what that is, it's a good night. Anyway, and so I just remember talking to Michael, and it was the first time we really talked, and I thought, oh, I've been talking to him for a while. When you get that feeling, and so here we are, married like 30 years.
So before that, Dina and I both did, I think, the Guilford show on the Green.
Yeah.
And we were talking about Missy Green and how she had a guy who was a carpenter. And Tina said, I would love to have a guy who was a carpenter. So,
That's
that night I saw the two of you talking and I thought,
Yeah, comes handy. But we've also, Chester, part of this talk is about the community, right? And the collaboration. I feel like Chester's a great community to collaborate. And Sosse, you had so many shows inviting Chester artists, but also like you used to do the 12 by 12 postcard show. And I just feel like that's been such a great part of our town. And I did a few luncheons at River Tavern where Jonathan created a menu and I did a presentation and a talk. And I think he did a few other artists. And then, do you remember Trish had a shop here in town and she made clothes, and Manal had a store carrying European crafts and clothing. We did 2 fashion shows, and so I feel like the events have been a big part of
I think
it.
so. And I think also, you did a great job heading up and Tom Perry, the merchants group, because we all wanted the same thing. And I think it worked out really well. I think now there are a lot of merchants. It's probably, they still have a group, but we used to meet together and talk. And I remember going one time and saying, we have 6 gallery shows a year, and we send out 900 invitations, and so many people come. Do you guys think you could be open and do something that night too?
That's great.
And
I did that.
We collaborated and
And everybody said yes.
yeah.
And it worked because we got a flow, everybody got some people, a lot of people actually.
Yeah.
But so I think I give it to that merchants group.
Sosse,
And there are a lot of artists, by the way, in Chester.
we're gonna open it up to questions the audience now, but, I know Barbara Delaney and Edmund Delaney, who were two of the founders of the Historical Society back in 1970, also worked with you with one of the first art galleries, right? Could you talk a little about Barbara? Barbara
Something
Delaney.
like Barbara Delaney's gallery. It was called the, off the
Oh,
wall,
the
the wall focus, yeah.
Wall Focus.
Yeah.
And
That was.
it was the first gallery, and,
Judy Joshua.
Yeah.
and we got together, they had come to us to say they were closing, and they were chosen by Connecticut Magazine as the best small gallery in the state. And they had a show, so we offered to, because they were closing, to move it over to Chester Gallery, just for that. And so we helped each other. I mean, it worked out well.
Yeah, I had a show in your gallery in 1985, I think. with Jan.
I was gonna ask you, was it
I think
85?
it was 85 with Jan Katz, the sculptor I met at the Lime
That's
Gallery.
right, that's right.
Yep, and, but we did well, I did well,
Yeah,
yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
well, I'm not surprised.
It was, and that was 5 years before I opened my studio.
Was it 5 years?
Yeah. I think it was 85. Yeah.
Dina, I might be mistaken, but I think Kate Hare was instrumental in starting the Friday night openings. Is that the first Friday?
So again, I can't remember.
Kate, would you like to?
Oh, sure. Well, I think that, they had been going on, but there's over the years always been kind of like a reigniting of that, having those events on Fridays. It became the first Friday of the month, always, for everyone to stay open, but.
I thought it was your initiative that
Yeah,
named it.
I mean, thank you, Deb. Well, it really had been going on for so many years, though, openings downtown. Before that, really. But then we just kind of wanted to bring attention to it again, and
Named it.
named it. Yes.
So it was, like Sosse said, we had six times a year, so it was almost every 2 months we had the openings, and then it turned into every first Friday, because it was, I think it was after the downturn of the economy in 2008, like, why not take,
It's a lot of work.
so now it's every first Friday, we can't really turn back, I mean, it's really, but.
And does anyone remember who had the flower shop in Dina's store where she is now?
Oh, Mary.
Yeah.
Was it Mary Way? Or?
Yes, Mary Way.
Oh, I thought it was another couple. I don't know.
She had a shop.
She was in a lot of different places.
She was in.
Basic goods.
Yeah.
Basic goods. and
She was in
services. She
Simon's.
sublet.
Yeah, Basic Goods.
Mary Way had a sublet.
But there was
Oh,
another
okay.
couple, I think, who had the flower shop in your particular
Oh, yeah, that was,
space.
what was her name, Pam?
Because I remember her doing flowers for Restaurant du Village.
Oh, that was where.
Or him, I think it was. Maybe.
Yeah, I remember him.
Yeah. It was a fabulous shop too. It was, I think it inspired my sister-in-law Laura, who was a florist in Maine. Because they had so many flowers and vines and
Was this
twigs
in
and-
90?
Nancy Ellen. Nancy Ellen started. Wasn't that
Or
where you
Mary.
talking on Four Waters?
It wasn't Mary, I
That
don't.
was 4 Water Street, yeah.
Yeah.
Mary was later. Anyway,
I know there's been so many great artists and
it was a fabulous shop.
creatives in this town, living in town, being in town, coming to town.
Toy makers.
You're a magnet,
Does anybody remember the Connecticut River Artisans?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I was just, while I was listening to all of you, I was remembering that we had about 6 different locations in the town of Chester.
Yes.
We started out up the road from the Circle in an old house. And from there we went to the building that is now Leif's home and studio. And then we went to, around the corner on 148, where the museum is.
The mill shop at the mill.
Yeah, the Mill House, we were there. And then we were in the Water Street building. And then we were where Otto's is. So,
Cheryl's Ceramics.
so,
And now you're in Essex.
yeah, and now it's, I believe it's in Essex now.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it's still there.
it is, yeah, I think so.
Question for Dina. Oh, any chance of you doing another luncheon somewhere?
Why not?
I would,
Let's do it.
it was so fabulous to have
And you
you.
got that great stone mobile.
I did. But just to see your thought process appear on paper
Yeah.
before it becomes your jewelry,
Yes.
you know, with a great lunch.
Yeah, I mean.
It was artistic in every way, and it was a wonderful, I would love to see you do more of these.
Okay. I did bring a little display, just to show a little bit of my process. I'm inspired by nature, so I go out and take walks and collect twigs and shells, and you can see some of my drawings and then things made into jewelry. And but yes, I will. I'll put you on the emails.
So I'm a Deep River native, and I just want to say that in the late 60s, the warmth was always here. You had Robbie's, my dad was a pharmacist for Shirley Maselli, and I'd come pick out a comic book when he was closing, and we'd go to Otto's, not the pizza place, but I would get the Lazy Man's Lobster dinner. And you had to buy the beer in the back because that's the way the liquor permit worked. And the jukebox played Nat King Cole. But I left stores to go to Fairfield County, and Westport did have a nice little Main Street with a little pink bookstore and a Oscar's Deli, and then it got ruined. So thankfully, when I got back to this area, it evolved thanks to people like you and Deep River and Essex the same. I feel like I grew up in a tri-town, Chester, Deep River, and Essex, and all of them, just like the sandbar at the mouth of the river that prevented the glut of a industrial mess, we prevented, the kind of, merchants and retail that are not nice. So thank you for that.
I remember the first time I walked into Chester, I was looking for a place for my husband Keith and I to live. And we were renting a little house on River Road, and I was pregnant with my daughter, and I walked through Chester, and I'm looking around, and I walked in, and I talked to Doris, and she owned the ice cream, Robbie's, and she was so wonderful. And I said, is that place empty up there? Is that available? And she said, oh yeah. I said, well, how much? And she said, oh, $250 for both floors. And my husband is a graphic designer, so we moved in there, and he had a studio there. And then one day I rode up the hill, and our house had been empty for 2 years. It was the Hartkowski farm originally, which was 79 acres, and it was empty. And I got out and I walked around, and I told Keith, and he got the shakes so bad thinking of buying a house. So we came back about 6 months later. It was still empty. It had been empty for 2 years. And I said, Keith, we have to buy in Chester, and we have to buy now. And so we bought our house up the hill, and we've been there ever since. It's morphed a lot, but thank goodness it got bigger. But it was just such a great place. I grew up in a little town of Old Greenwich, and I just remember, I was a sailor, and everybody was sailors, and we all hung out at Watsy's, and I worked there in Old Greenwich, and it was just like here. And it just felt like home the minute I walked in to this town. and it was great. And I raised both my kids here, and my daughter lives over on Pleasant Street with my grandchildren, so that's great. And so that's how you morph around here, I think.
I have a question for Leif, or somebody you can talk about. One of the very first things that brought me to Chester was your concerts in the garden. Someone told me about this man who would open his home up and would host original singer-songwriters and musicians in his garden. And you were talking about handymen.
Yeah.
And you're quite handy too. So maybe you could talk a little bit about how you transformed your sanctuary into a.
I know you should all see the back of his place. I mean, it is gorgeous.
And music is so interwoven into.
In Chester.
As an art form.
Well, thanks. So, started doing concerts well, first I started doing a salon series, Sunday salons inside the house. And that was collaboration with a couple other people. And people would have 10 minutes to tell a story, sing a song, or, read poetry, or do an act, skit or something like that. And then the next person would go up, and it was a free thing, and people would come and bring snacks and wine or whatever, on Sunday afternoon or winter time. And then once the weather got nice, we started to do it outside sometimes, and then I thought, well, instead of having all these people coming up and only having 10 minutes, why don't we pick a band or a playwright or somebody to come and do a performance and ask for donations, and then they can make some money, and we can make a little money to improve the place. And so that turned into Concerts in the Garden. And 10 years ago, when the roof on my studio started to leak, and the ants were cutting holes in it, I thought, oh, that's the ants. Yeah, they would just move from the porch over to the roof. So I had a bunch of ideas in my mind, and some that I sketched out of what I would do with it once I needed to replace the roof. And so I decided to do the eyebrow dormer and I raised the back of it up like a shed dormer sort of in the back, so that we could have a big stage. And put some French doors on it for the winter as like a workshop where I could pull my tools out and make things like cupboards and floorboards and whatever I needed for the house. And but before I did that, actually I built an amphitheater with stone a few years before, which is like a Greek style amphitheater. It's earth and stones and staircases, and they're like a few layers that are 2 steps high. So like perfect sitting wall, and then in between the staircase going up is like 2 7-inch steps, so it's about 16 inches of sitting. And people will come to see concerts there, and the concert series goes from July to the end of August, beginning of July to the end of August, between just after 4th of July, just before Labor Day. So we got 7 consecutive Saturday nights this summer lined up, and it's all singer-songwriter or original music or traditional music, but no covers, no cover bands. One reason, because I don't want to deal with BMI, ASCAP, and all those guys. That's the big reason, because they're just bullies, and I got tired of listening to them. So I said, no way, nobody that will play a cover song. It's going to be all original. Because there's plenty of original bands out there, and I have 2 bands now that are doing mostly original or traditional work, and so it's a lot of fun.
It's really been incredible to hear your start, your stories as you started. And I think about our children. I'm a public educator. The first time I drove through Chester was in 1978 with inner city kids from Marion, Connecticut. And I was bedazzled by the town. And here we're back. It's like, how can that even be possible? But what do you think, or how can we get children involved in your craft? Or have you thought about that? It would be great to think about that. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Me?
Well, we do a little bit of things with Chester Elementary and the like the Halloween event is with the elementary, and then, I feel like they come to town. I know I've had some, just kids from the area come in. I mean, I think we're all open to it if they wanna come to town, but we haven't done like a program.
You know, we have
Sauce
done,
teaching.
I taught basket
Sauce
tree
is-
at
yeah, basket
at
tree
your
still.
elementary school, for quite a few years, didn't you?
I did some painting, drawing,
Yeah.
demonstrations and lessons.
Yeah,
And through the library, it was the most recent one, where the library had some
Yeah.
kind of an art day at my place.
That's right.
And I used to do once a week, I think it was, with the elementary school kids came after school, and they came and learned how to draw, and they went to River Tavern and learned about cooking.
Right.
So they stopped doing that after a while. I don't know what happened, but I had this great lesson. I thought it was pretty cool. Take a box and get the kids to draw the box, and they say, "Oh, I know how to draw a box." They're drawing the box the way they think a box looks, not looking at it. When you look at a box, it's got a top, a front, and a side. Sometimes you can't see the top, but sometimes you can, depending on the perspective. So they would get all confused, and finally they'd say, "Okay," after half an hour, "We got the box done. We all know how to draw boxes now, right?" They're like, "Yeah, we got it." And I said, "Take a look." I lifted the box up, and there was a Tonka truck. So then I showed them how everything's made out of a box, and that kind of, even the wheels are made out like a rounded box with little box treads on it. And so I always love teaching kids like that, because you can say, don't stop drawing, because drawing is like a language. And if you practice it enough, when you're 30, you'll draw like a 30-year-old. But if you stop when you're 7, or 10, you'll always draw like a 10-year-old the rest of your life.
I do a basketry class for the historical society in the summer for the kids that come. It's a small group, but it's, I think 6 or 7 children take it.
That's great.
Yeah.
I teach at the Spectrum Gallery children felting. We do felting classes and things like that. But after 27 years of teaching in middle school, it's just something I just miss. So I do that too. It's just fun to work with kids. They're the best. They're just so full of ideas. When I see grown-up art, sometimes I'm just like, well, okay, I see so much original artwork, especially as a middle school teacher, and it just comes out of them, whether they like it or not. And then you start having classes with them, and it's really fun. So I taught a couple classes down at Cedar Lake once or twice, and Spectrum Gallery, and there's just lots of kids that would love to take summer classes.
Remember we did that at the East Line Middle School, or elementary
Yeah.
school? Had kids paint with the temper paint outside. The daffodils are coming up.
It's just so much fun, so, yeah.
Well, this has been wonderful. If there are